including Mainers. And so, Lord, we are thankful for the life and the legacy of a friend like Charlie Kirk. Lord, thank you for the way that he was so bold, and you gave him so much giftings and eloquence to communicate things such as the gospel and gender and marriage and sin and righteousness. And Lord, we have seen since his martyrdom that there seems to be an awakening of the American public, including the youth. And so, Lord, for Turning Point and TPUSA Faith, and certainly for every Bible-teaching church in the land, we pray, Lord, would you in these last days grant one big catch of human souls. So, Lord, help tonight to be one chain link in this whole process. Lord, as Representative Laurel Libby and her husband have made their journey here, that, Lord, the testimony would be glorifying, and that, Lord, we might receive instruction. Lord, there may be men or women here who you're calling to serve in a civic role, Lord, to step into the fight. I pray, Lord, would you use this time for your good? We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, you may be seated. And if I have not yet had the opportunity to, let me just welcome you to Calvary Chapel, Greater Portland. My name is Travis. I have the privilege of serving as the pastor here, along with a wonderful team and a wonderful church that God has assembled here. Just a couple housekeeping announcements, then I'm going to turn it over to Ethan. Ethan is our chapter lead for the TPUSA Faith here in Portland. A couple things. One, we do have restrooms outside of the sanctuary, both levels, downstairs and upstairs. And I told Representative Laurel Libby to take her time tonight. There's a lot that we'd love to hear from her. So we didn't give her much of a time limit, so she said she'd be less than 5 hours tonight. But thank you for coming out on a freezing cold Thursday. Most of us here acknowledge that we want to see change in our state. And the thing that I keep hearing often, and I bet many of you have heard this also, is that lie of the separation from church and state. That's not working well, and it's a lie. And the gospel and the biblical truths, the pulpits are supposed to shape culture. And I believe that misnomer has kept the doctrine of God's gospel in the walls of the church. Meanwhile, the godless have taken over every area of our civilization, especially here in Maine. So our prayer is that events such as this would just be an equipping for godly men and women to step up. So I'm very thankful that Laurel Libby would be here. But I also want to make mention, after she is done speaking, she's going to transition into a time of Q&A. So if you're here and there's a couple things that you have prepared, or as you listen to her testify and her encouragement tonight, if there's anything that stands out or you'd like to ask, at the end of her time speaking, she'll remain up here, and then Ethan will be over here with a mic, and Ethan will hold on to that mic, but he'll be nice. He'll let you talk until it's time that you stop talking. So, but please ask a question if you can, and I know Laurel will be happy to answer any question that you may have. And then the final thing I would say is, for those of you who are unaware, we are attempting to do this once a month, and this is just our second, but we do have a tentative date for January, if you like to think that far out, on the 22nd, which we'll always be doing them on Thursdays. On the 22nd of January, Representative Reagan Paul will also be here, and we're excited for likewise her testimony and what she can share. So just put that there if you need to in your notes, and it'll be on our church website as well. So at this time, if you guys would give a round of applause to Ethan Saylor. He serves as the chapter president here.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate you all. And I hope you're encouraged to see this, to see what God's doing, and what a minority for Christian Republicans and people who are standing up for biblical values, such a minority in Maine. But this is how coalitions are built. This is where they start. So it's really cool to see. I know many of you involved in the political arena, you know that as well. You've seen it. So I hope you're encouraged. I'm encouraged as well. I just want to begin with a quote briefly. Jonathan Edwards, he was part of the First Great Awakening, and he said, "True boldness of Christ transcends all. It is indifference to the displeasure of either friend or foe. Boldness enables Christians to forsake all rather than Christ, and to prefer to offend all rather than to offend him." And we're living in a culture that necessitates boldness. The culture has gone so far. And really what happened, and again, I won't take up too much of your time in introducing Laurel Libby, but what happened is the church seeded the ground. And when the church started by seeding the ground by saying men and women can be functionally the same, it ends up going further. It starts there. that men and women can be basically the same. There's no distinct roles. And beginning there, why can't men marry men, women marry women? Why can't a man become a woman? Why can't a woman become a man if they're functionally the same? Why can't a man be a mother and a woman be a father? And why can't a man be the world champion in a woman's event? Why can't we start these changes as low as 3 years old? And this is what we're seeing in a culture where the church has left where its stance should be, and the world is taken over. It's corrupted, it's rotted. So this is where we are, and I say all that to introduce the fact that there are people who stand up boldly for biblical values, and at some point the righteous do have to stand. Laurel Libby has been a shining example of this very thing. She serves in the 90th district, and she's been there. This is her third term. She's a mother, small business owner, registered nurse, and she's a freedom fighter who has currently garnered national attention really for standing up and standing to the godless in this nation, the godless in politics, and taking a bold stance there. So we're really grateful for her taking the time tonight to share. She has a story to tell of the way God has worked and this government and taking a stand and freedom of speech. So I hope you all are excited, as I am, to hear from her, to hear what she has to say. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Laurel Libby.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you all. All right, is my mic on? Okay, just making sure all the technology is working right. I am so thrilled to be with you guys tonight. It's a pleasure, it's an honor. And I'm going to push back real quick on conservatives and specifically Republicans being so in the minority. And if you want to ask any questions about this afterwards, we can revisit. Just FYI, House Republicans lost the majority by 60 votes in 2024. That is 60 votes across the entire state. So that was 3 House seats. Feel free to ask me questions about that after. That's not what I'm talking about tonight, but I would be happy to address it later. So thank you very much to Travis, to Calvary Chapel, and to the Turning Point USA Faith Chapter. I am excited to be here with you guys tonight. And I want to begin with a question. This is not just me talking at you guys. We're going to have a little bit of a dialogue. And so my question to you is, what do you think is our most important right that we have as Americans? You can just shout it out because I can't see your hands. Speech. Okay, freedom of speech. Freedom of religion. Freedom to bear arms. Okay, somebody always brings up the Second Amendment in Maine. And I very much agree that that is an important right. But for everyone that's shouting out freedom of speech, yes, I agree. The First Amendment is our absolute most critical right. And the thing is, as some people pointed out, freedom of religion, the First Amendment is about a lot more than just freedom of speech. So what else does the First Amendment protect? We heard freedom of religion. Freedom to assemble. To petition the government, to seek redress, yes, of grievances. What else? Freedom of the press, thank you. Okay, so that's a pretty good collection of rights covered by the First Amendment. When you think about that, the freedom to associate, the freedom to assemble, like we're doing here tonight, the right to petition our government for redress of grievances, these are the things that, in short, protect our ability to challenge and change our government. And so the First Amendment is, it's appropriate that it comes first, because without the First Amendment, we wouldn't have that Second Amendment. The First Amendment protects all of our other rights. And so tonight, you may have thought I was coming here to talk to you about girls' sports, and we will get there. But we're going to primarily talk about free speech and the First Amendment, and not as an abstract idea, but the actual nitty-gritty, because the fact is that that freedom of speech and our First Amendment rights are under attack in America today. And I love hearing folks talking from up here about how it's the church's responsibility to address that and protect these rights, because that couldn't be more right. But we're going to go back in time to my senior year in college, which was a long time ago. And my senior year in college, one of my nursing professors had us write up our 5-year plan. And my 5-year plan contained a few different things. One was that I was going to become a part of a disaster relief team, which I did do. It was the only thing on my 5-year plan that I did do. I also was not ever going to have children. 5 kids later. And let's see, what else is on that list? I'll tell you, there were a lot of things that were on that list, but one thing that was very absent from it was ever running for public office. It was not on a 5-year or 10-year or 20-year plan when I was a senior in college. So 2019 comes along, and John and I were raising our kids, and we were both born and raised in Maine, but not paying particular attention to what's going on in Maine politics until one day. I distinctly remember reading in the newspaper about these 3 bills that were pending before the legislature. There was one to allow for physician-assisted suicide. There was another to repeal religious and philosophical exemptions for vaccines. And there was a third to require Maine taxpayers to pay for abortions. And when I saw this list of things that were going on in our legislature that were being advanced in our state, I just kind of woke up in that moment and realized I don't recognize my state anymore. And so at that point, I started speaking up. I learned who my legislators were. I had no idea previous to that, but I learned, I called, I emailed. I went to the State House for, as far as I can recall, the first time. I testified on legislation, and I asked my legislators, I don't know if any of you have ever done this, I know a couple people have for sure. I asked my legislators very, very nicely if they could please vote against all 3 of those bills. Do you think that they did? No, they did not. They voted for all 3, and all 3 sailed through the legislature, and they became law. They are law in Maine today. And so at that point, I got more involved. And I collected signatures. I helped collect signatures for a people's veto. And come 2020, I started getting questions asked if folks were asking if I would run for office, if I would run for state rep. And I'm getting these calls, and I thought about it, and I said, okay, here's the deal. If you cannot find anyone else to run for office, then I will do it. And you guys are laughing because you know what naive I had no idea. That was when they stopped recruiting. So long and short, shortly thereafter, here I was running for state representative. I had never done anything like that. I did not have a political pedigree. I did not have previous experience in this. I had no fancy connections. But by the grace of God and with the power of the grassroots behind me, we flipped a 2-term Democrat incumbent seat and won back in 2020. The fact is, if God calls you to do something, whether you are equipped at the moment or not, He will equip you. And so that was 2020. Before we get to girls' sports, before we get to this year, I'm going to continue to talk about the past because I want to talk about free speech and the First Amendment in the context of when I got it wrong. So May of 2021, you guys remember the government response to COVID? Anybody? We don't all have amnesia, right? Okay, we all remember. So May of 2021, we had a statewide mask mandate in place for over a year. And at that point, Governor Mills finally lifted this mask mandate across the state. And at that point, when it was lifted across the state, legislative leadership saw fit to put a mask mandate in place solely for the State House. So that's right. You could go to Walmart without the 6-foot lines. You could go to the movie theater. You could go to the post office, anywhere in the state without a mask. But if you wanted to go to the people's house and you wanted to speak freely and petition your government, you wanted to assemble, you had this arbitrary barrier. And you had to have this incursion on your liberty of a face mask in order to approach your government. And I thought that was terribly unfair, and a number of other legislators did as well. So that next week, we walked into the State House, 6 of us, walked into the State House without masks on. As you can imagine, we were very quickly punished. The then Speaker of the House, Ryan Fecteau, stripped us of our committees. So we were taken off our committees. I was serving on the Judiciary Committee at the time. I was taken off of it, replaced with a Democrat. And we were told, this was the harsher punishment, that we would not be allowed in the chamber to vote on behalf of our constituents without masking. So that was a little chilling, and it inspired a great deal of thought and prayer. And at the end of the day, I put a face shield back on, and I walked into the chamber, and I voted. And at the time, I thought that I was doing what I needed to do to represent my constituents. I figured, I had been elected to represent them, to speak on their behalf, and to vote on their behalf. And so it was my duty. But the fact is, I caved. I took that first step to stand on behalf of Maine people and their rights. And at the first pushback, reversed my stance and caved. I think, though, that we learn more from our failures than we do from our triumphs. And so fast forward to 2025, and President Trump, in February of this year, he issued an executive order. And that executive order said that we had to uphold Title IX and ensure girls' sports and spaces were for girls. And immediately following that, the Maine Principals Association came out with their stance, and they said, in essence, we're going to ignore that. We're going to ignore the executive order. We are going to continue to allow biological males to participate in girls' sports. Now, this was not anything new in Maine, in case anyone thinks that it was. There was a young man who was dominating in cross country for quite some time. And back in my first term, we had a bill that was meant to address this issue, that would have protected girls' sports and ensured a fair, safe, and level playing field. Unsurprisingly, it did not pass. And so we've been grappling with this issue in our state for a while. But this was the first time since I was elected a state representative, and in any memory that I had, of anyone at the federal level standing up for our girls' rights. And so that was incredible and a huge change. I posted at the time about the Maine Principals Association and their stance and what they had said, that they were going to abide by what Maine had laid out and continue allowing boys and girls sports. And that post garnered a fair amount of attention, and it caused a friend of mine to reach out to me and say, just FYI, there is a boy who is going to be participating in the girls' pole vault. You should know that. It's coming right up. And sure enough, a boy won the girls' state championship in the pole vault several weeks later in February. And, I saw that picture, which I'm sure many or most of you have seen, that picture of this boy standing on a podium in first place, on the top of a podium, next to young women who had worked for years and years and years to achieve that win and were denied it because he chose to participate. And it struck me as just absolutely so incredibly unfair and unjust. I just could not let it go. And so that night, I posted side-by-side photos of this young man standing in first place, holding the medal that should have been around the second place girl's neck. And the year before, when he was standing in fifth place, competing in the boys' pole vault. And you know they say that a picture speaks 1,000 words? Well, that collection of pictures, that duo of pictures spoke 1,000 words. And I think it's one thing to hear that boys are competing against girls and dominating, and it's another thing to see it entirely and to see the visual proof that girls are being erased and their rights taken away. And so that post went viral. It was everywhere because people saw what words couldn't capture, that biological males are erasing girls. And some of my colleagues in the Maine legislature didn't like that post. They didn't like the truth being out there, right? They didn't want that undeniable proof in front of people's eyes. And so I got an email from the Speaker of the House, who happened to be, again, in my third term, Speaker Ryan Fecteau. And he asked me, very politely, to take my post down. And I asked him if he would stand up for Maine girls' rights. He never answered the question. I declined to take my post down, and we agreed to disagree. A week later, that was on February break, a week later we went back into session, and I was censured by the House because of my post. And honestly, I didn't think that they would do it. So, I went into it thinking, we're hearing these rumors. There's a rumor that the Democrats are going to censure me, but it's so unwise politically to do it, because we all know what happened afterwards, that I didn't really think they'd go through with it. But when they did, they handed me this megaphone to speak to the injustice that not just Maine girls are facing, but girls across the country. And then in addition to that, to speak to how free speech is under attack. Because I was censured for my exercise of free speech. And so that evening I was called into the Speaker's office. I'm sure no one in here has ever been called into the principal's office. Anybody? Have you ever been called into the principal's office? Because that was me getting called into the Speaker's office. I knew exactly what was going on. I got this text, Representative Libby, would you please come to my office? And so I did. And the Speaker outlined the process and what would happen with the censure. And then also outlined the process by which I could not have the punishment of the censure affect me, and that would be to apologize. And so I ended that meeting with the Speaker telling him that he would go down in history as the man who silenced a woman for speaking up on behalf of girls. And that is exactly what happened. We walked into the House chamber. I attempted to give a floor speech. I tried to explain my side of things and what had occurred and give my viewpoint. And I was constantly interrupted over and over and over again by folks on the other side of the aisle. And so I shouted out a last phrase, and I ended my speech. And we voted. It was straight down party lines. Republicans voted against my censure. Democrats voted for it. And I was censured. And if you've ever seen, in Congress, there was a censure shortly thereafter, actually. And it's just kind of a slap on the wrist. It's basically a, don't do that again. We didn't like it very much. But there's no actual consequence for it. That is not the case in Maine. So in Maine, when you are censured, you are not allowed to either speak or vote on behalf of your constituents until and unless you apologize. So not only was I punished, I was censured for my expression of free speech, I then had to apologize, government-compelled speech, in order to get my ability to vote and speak on behalf of my 9,000 constituents again. Well, I told you guys about my first term, and I've learned a lot. I learned a lot from that experience. And so apologizing was never an option. First of all, I won't apologize. I won't apologize for speaking up for girls. And I will not apologize for speaking the truth. And even bigger than that, I will not apologize for standing up for women's rights when we are being erased and replaced with a counterfeit. And so, I thought about the message that would send, because I had requests. Many people asked me, why won't you just apologize? Can't you just say something kind of snarky and like I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, or I'm sorry that you were offended. There were all these iterations. People saying, why can't you just you don't have to mean it. I think about the message that an apology of any kind would send to those girls who were seeing someone stand up for them, and what that would say to them to back down after making that stand. And then also, and this is even the more insidious thing, you think about the ramifications, not just across Maine, but across our country. If we allowed the precedent to stand of a majority party being allowed to silence a member of the minority party for speech. It doesn't matter if you're a blue state, a purple state, or a red state. That is such a dangerous precedent to allow to stand. And so instead of apologizing, we sued the speaker, and we took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won. The truth of the matter is that the opposition can't win based on the merits of their policies. Just take something like boys competing in girls' sports. 80% of Americans, 2/3 of Mainers, believe that it is wrong for boys to compete in girls' sports. This is not a popular stand. And so instead of fighting for their ideas based on the merits, they have to silence. They have to use intimidation and fear because their policies don't have legs. And so, tragically, we've heard the name of Charlie Kirk tonight. Tragically, the assassination of Charlie Kirk shows the eventual, inevitable end of this logic. When words are deemed too dangerous, eventually, somebody resorts to violence. And I believe that Charlie Kirk was assassinated because he exercised his right to free speech. And it was dangerous. Free speech that leads to freedom of thought is dangerous to an ideology that's built on lies. And so, in that case, Charlie was not just exercising his First Amendment rights, but he was encouraging others to do so as well. And that's what's so dangerous to the opposition, because that might encourage minds to be changed and hearts to be changed. And then that might lead to societal change and a turnaround in our country. That's why what we do here in Maine, knowing that the opposition is going to use these tactics, what we do in Maine and across our country, it matters. It matters so, so much. Freedom of speech is the bedrock of our republic. Our First Amendment rights protect our republic. And so if we allow intimidation, if we allow violence, if we allow government retaliation to chill that speech, then we will lose everything else. I will admit to you tonight that for most of my life, I have taken my First Amendment right to free speech completely for granted. And I kind of think about it this way. As Americans, we know we have certain rights, right? When you wake up in the morning, do you think about the fact that you're breathing? There's always someone in the audience that's like, yeah, I do every day. But I don't know about you. I do not. I do not wake up thinking I'm breathing. It just is a fact. And previous to this, I would have told you that freedom of speech was a fact. It just was there. And I have learned very dramatically this year that that is not a fact, and it is not something that I can take for granted or that any of us should take for granted. We have to protect that right. The fact is that the First Amendment isn't just a legal shield. It's a moral obligation of us as a citizenry. It demands that we speak and that we exercise that right, even if it costs us. And I would say, especially when it costs us, because you know what? The fact is that when it has that potential to cost us the most is when there's the most at stake, when we stand to either gain the most or lose the most. And you look around this country, Charlie Kirk's voice has been silenced. I would argue it's louder than ever. But he has been silenced himself. We have girls around this country in Maine who are being pushed aside. We have here in Augusta, the government tried to silence me. Together, we have an obligation to speak for those who can't and for those who are pushed aside. And the thing that I have realized over this year is that the real fight is not the issues, right? The real fight is not girls' sports. The real fight is not taxes or energy policy. The real fight is the fight to preserve our right to free speech and that right that makes every other one possible. Do you know how you can know when you're right over the target? How? People complain. Yeah, that's one way to put it. They complain loudly. When the opposition lashes out the hardest, that's when you know you're absolutely over the target. When you absolutely are standing your ground and they lash out, that's when you've got to hold, because that is when we stand to lose or gain the most. And if I think about it, back in February, if I had not been censured, the whole thing would have blown over. It would have been like this little blip for a couple weeks, and then nobody would have thought about it again. But then we had the censure, and then we had Governor Mills challenging President Trump, and then we won in the Supreme Court, and it just kind of went on and on and on. And the censure was the thing that handed this megaphone to speak to girls' sports and freedom of speech. And those months were pretty crazy. Those months were crazy. And I know that folks in Maine, I had people reach out to me constantly, probably many of you in this church, and saying, we are praying for you. Please be encouraged. There were so many ways people reached out and were encouraging. But when you're over the target and they are lashing out the hardest, you can have this incredible peace when you know you are where God has put you in that place and for that time. And so they were crazy months, but they were also peace-filled months because of having that knowledge. And the fact is that they only succeed in silencing us if we let them. I think back to 2021 and what happened with the speaker, and I shifted blame. I said, well, I didn't have a choice. I had to do what I did and make sure that my constituents had representation, but I was the one who made that choice. And I was the one who had a choice in February to stand or not. And no one can silence you. No one can silence me. No one can silence any of us except ourselves. We are the ones that control that. Of course, there may be consequences. You may get censured. You may not be able to speak and vote on behalf of your constituents. But I know for a fact now that preserving our First Amendment rights supersedes, is more important than my ability to vote or speak on behalf of my constituents, as important as that is, because our constitutional and God-given rights are absolutely paramount, and they are what preserves this union. So I believe 100% to the core of my being that this moment requires courage from all of us. And, we talk about the big moments. I also think about those little moments. I kind of think about courage like a muscle. And, if you exercise your muscles, they get used to what you're doing. If you're a runner and you run, then you get experienced at that. You grow your ability. You get faster. You're able to run longer. You have more endurance. Same with exercising any muscle. And I think that exercising courage is the same. If we choose in those small little moments to not have that conversation with a neighbor, to not speak the truth to our loved one, or whatever that small challenging moment might be, how would we ever think that we would have that ability to exercise that muscle when it's a huge moment and it really counts the most that we might think, and it really matters? We're not going to have the courage for those big moments if we haven't exercised it in the small ones. And so I think that we have to think about it from that perspective and be bold, because when you speak, you give permission to others to do the same. And when leaders lead from the front, and when leaders stand, that's when movements rise. I think back to February, and there was a young woman here. I was here for the Riley Gaines event recently, and I ran into a young woman who has been on my mind a lot since February. A young woman who was a senior in high school this year. She graduated in June. And after I was censured, we met. She started speaking up about her experience. And she told her story about being a young woman, a 7th grader in northern Maine, and that she had to change in a locker room with a boy. And honestly, when I heard her story, I was kind of shocked. I was like, northern Maine, Aroostook County? How was this happening 5 years ago? But it was. And now she felt emboldened to tell her story. And not only tell her story here in Maine, she has now made a difference. She testified in front of a congressional committee, and so has taken this stand for other young women here in Maine boldly, because she saw that it was okay to do so. And there are people watching us. People are watching you in what you do on an everyday basis. And when they see you be bold, it encourages others to do the same. So here's my challenge. Don't leave this battle to other people. Do not assume that others will tell the truth. Assume that no one else will until you do. And in those moments when you have a choice, make the choice to stand and to speak. And I'll go one further for the church. And I'm glad I've already heard this tonight. I kind of heard this conclusion earlier. We cannot expect to have a culture that reflects Christ if we are not salt and light in that culture. And we cannot expect a government that governs according to our values if we are not in and influencing that government. We are where we are as a culture, as a state, and as a country because the church has believed that lie, the separation of church and state, and has abdicated their role. And so I'm encouraged to see a church that accepts that responsibility and understands that we can't be salt and light apart from that culture and expect that culture to reflect anything that we believe in. There are moments in our lives, and I think everybody in here, or most people in here, can probably remember the one that I first think of. I think back to my junior year in college. I don't know, I guess college on the mind these days. And I remember one morning, I walked downstairs. I ran cross country and track. And so I headed down to the gym one morning in the fall and did my morning workout. And on my way to the gym, there was an office door was open and people were watching TV. it just kind of struck me as a little odd, but I kept on my way and went and did my workout. And then when I came out of the gym and past that office again, there were like a bunch of people early in the morning. It was very weird, so I stopped. They were watching TV, like a couple of people were crying. It seemed very weird. So I stopped, and that is when I found out about 9/11. And we remember these moments, I think, for the rest of our lives. And that was probably the first one that really stuck out to me as this seminal moment. But we had another one recently. I was in D.C. on September 10th of this year. I was at a lunch and then visiting with a friend. And somebody texted and said, "Turn on the TV." And that was when I learned that Charlie Kirk had been killed. And I'm sure many of you in the audience could tell a similar story of knowing where and when you were when you learned about that. And I was in D.C. My family was home. My husband was working that day. And the kids were with a friend. And some of my kids are too young to know who Charlie Kirk is. But one of our teenagers definitely does. And so I called my friend who had the kids. And I asked to speak with our teen. And told her what had happened. I kind of plainly said it. Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And I thought she would have a lot of questions about what had happened, the particulars. But the first question that she asked was not what I expected. I had just the week prior been booked to speak at a college in Colorado on this topic of free speech, and this past year. And she knew that. And so I told her about Charlie Kirk's assassination, and the first question she asked was, "So, are you going to stop speaking?" Which surprised me. And I had to pause for a minute. And my answer was no. No. We can't. That's what they want. And B, if we do, that's when we lose everything. In these moments when the most is at stake, I know the future that I want to hand my kids. And it's not a future where their right to speak freely, to dialogue, and all of the other rights that are protected by the First Amendment are absent. And so I told her no. And the fact is, if we want to have a hope of handing our kids a legacy that is a legacy of freedom, where we have a First Amendment that still stands, and where truth is spoken, where truth can be spoken boldly, where debate is embraced and liberty is protected, then we all have to be willing to be bold and speak the truth, even when it might be painful and even when it might cost us. And so that is the encouragement and exhortation that I would leave you with tonight, knowing that we also have questions. And so thank you very much. God bless Maine and God bless America. We do have a mic, so if you have questions, raise your hand, I guess, and you'll be around, or...
Yeah, if you guys want to just line up over here or sit down, and we could just take questions one at a time. But I bet you all were encouraged. That was a blessing. I know it was. So yeah, anyone wants to come up and start with a question, feel free, and yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, first of all.
My pleasure.
So I understand that you're not seeking re-election, correct? And you're going to be working with Lead Maine, is it called?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious, in your opinion, what areas of the state of Maine are you thinking Lead Maine is going to have the most impact on and, hopefully change?
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, sure.
She's not a plant. but I'm glad to be able to have the opportunity to talk about Lead Maine. So that is correct. A lot of folks have asked. I am not running for re-election. I'm not running for any office in 2026. We are facing a lot of challenges in our state, and our family has come to the conclusion that we can best work for that change in this way, launching Lead Maine. So our goal, our mission, is to educate, empower, and engage Maine people to help make that change, that societal and electoral change that we want to see in the long term. We have our full launch coming up in January. So if you haven't signed up at leadmaine.com for updates, please do so. I won't be offended if you get your phone out right now. Sign up at leadmaine.com for updates, and we can keep you up to date on that. Lead Maine is a few different kind of technical pieces. We have a nonprofit, and we also have a political action committee. And overarching all of that is a communications network to do that education that we feel is so critical for Maine people. And so there, frankly, isn't a corner of Maine that we don't want to be. So we welcome engagement from every corner of Maine.
Anyone else feel free to come up and have a question?
And it does not have to just be on the topic of girls' sports or freedom of speech. If you want to ask other things about the legislature or politics in Maine, what's going on in our state, feel free.
Again, thank you, Laurel, especially 2020 for so many of us was eye-opening with the free speech being under attack. It was shocking, and they haven't stopped. So, one of the things that I've heard, connected with some certain people who is trying to get some support of conservative-minded men and women to stand up and to serve in local and state government. You went through that process. You just testified about what it was like to think, I'm never going to do that. Hey, if no one else is there, and then you said probably very accurately that that's when they stopped recruiting. They've set their sights on you, but you went through the process of how do you do this? And I know specifically talking to Phil Hendrick that they're looking for people in Westbrook and Scarborough to represent. So if someone's here tonight and they're thinking, okay, maybe I would do it, can you just speak a little bit on the process? Perhaps maybe it's not as daunting as someone might think, or maybe it is, but would you just share in that process for what someone who here might be thinking that they would like to serve in some capacity?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that the learning curve over the last 6 years has been dramatic. And I remember very much being me in 2019 and how intimidating it was to think about getting involved in any way whatsoever. So first of all, family support is critical. And also then support of your friends. I had a phenomenal campaign manager who came alongside and taught me much in that campaign. A candidate's job is to raise funds and raise votes. And so I had to learn how to do that. If you are in this room tonight and you are thinking about running for office, come see me. Let's chat. But you know what? I want us to be in a place where it is so commonplace to think about running for office. I had a question the other night from somebody on social media asking how and why someone got into office in Auburn. There was a man who was elected to our school board who believes that he is a woman and has been on our school board for a couple of years. And so the question was posed to me, how did this happen? And kind of in Auburn, that's your backyard, that's where you live. And the answer was, no one would run. Literally, no one would run. And so this man got elected to the school board with 7 write-in votes and has since been influencing school board policy and policy for our kids. And this happens, this happens across Maine. When conservatives do not step up to run and fill those positions, we can't expect otherwise. But at the same time, I remember being me in 2019 and not knowing what it took. And so you do need that support, and certainly we are excited to have Lead Maine and other entities in Maine that can help provide that support.
Thank you. I just had a comment and a question. I've been following you on social media, and you have done so much for the state. I can't even imagine I read some of the comments that are left to you.
Don't read the comments.
And,
that's what I tell my mother.
Yeah, you got to be strong. And I think I had a chance to meet your husband tonight as well. And not just you, but I'm sure your whole entire family. When you stand up and you are as courageous as you are, it's got to have been really hard. people, I'm sure, are making comments. You probably go in the supermarket, and God knows the comments she gets. So the question I have for you is, you've done so much for Maine people and putting us on the map and making a stand. How can we help you? How can we give back to you?
Oh, man. Thank you. First of all, I do have to say thank you to Maine people because, you know, the comment section on social media is fortunately not real life. And my experience with Mainers has been so much encouragement over this last year and so much support. And so I couldn't be more thankful for that. How can you respond? By getting involved. You know, it's awesome to see people here tonight with this chapter. We're looking forward to folks getting involved with Lead Maine, but get active. You know, I want to see a Maine where it is ordinary for its citizenry to engage and participate with government, where it's not intimidating, but it's every day, and it's not a big deal. It's just part of life. And we're a really far cry from that right now, but that is the ideal, where everyday citizens just know that it is their civic responsibility to engage and shape their government. And that is how we win our state back.
Hi, Laurel.
Hey, Sue.
When I met Laurel, I didn't know how to speak up. And this woman has changed my life. Laurel, I didn't know about the mask and the whole thing about that, but then you were a force to reckon with the Speak Up for Life. You brought so many people to that State House that day, where it became praise and worship at 2:30 in the morning. Mm. And then we did the dinner table, and then we did voter ID. You have done so much to put Maine on the map, and all the things you have done with Fox News. Thank you. Thank you for putting us in the spotlight. Thank you for standing up, and thank you for helping us speak up for everything. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Sue. And I'm gonna put Sue on the spot. No. Yes, I am. Because Sue is a great example. She is somebody who came into what she was referencing with Speak Up for Life was an effort that was not just my effort. It was a huge effort by a lot of people who helped mobilize Maine people, educate and mobilize Maine people against the most egregious abortion bill in the entire country and in most of the civilized world, which passed and is law today in Maine. Women can get an abortion for any reason at any time up to birth. But out of that, people like Sue got involved and engaged and now know a heck of a lot more about their state government and how to be involved. And so that is, Sue, you're a phenomenal example of that, of knowing, maybe you didn't know anything to start, but being willing to learn and engage and grow along the way and help shape your government in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel.
Well, I don't have a question. I just have a few comments. I really want to thank you for everything you've done, your courage. I think that you are a great role model for our young people. Not only our young people, but adults as well. And I wanted to, share, I was, brought up on the premise that the two things you don't talk about are religion and politics. Well, today, those are the two most important things you need to talk about. And I am so glad to see a church like this church that is willing to be out there and be vocal on it. All of our churches need to be vocal on this. We're in the position we are in now because we've been silent too long. We can't be silent any longer. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I count myself in that category of people who were silent for a long time. I said at the beginning, we were very involved being, parents and paying no attention whatsoever to our government other than, certainly voting for president. When we the people sleep, this is what we get.
If there's not any more questions, anyone else have any questions before we close?
Thank you all so very much.
I just want to thank you all for coming. Obviously, we came for Laurel, and she did a great job. I hope you all were encouraged. And just thinking of, she took a big step of boldness to stand up to the state of Maine, you know, and like she said, we all have our individual circles where people are looking to us for guidance, for examples. You know, for us Christians, there's people who are looking at our lives who will never look up and down on a Bible. So there's people looking at us and seeing if we will be bold. And she certainly has. I know we're all encouraged, you know, convicted by that. And it's time for, you know, the church and the state of Maine to wake up and to mobilize and to follow in those footsteps. So thank you all for coming. Again, we'll be back. The next event would be the 22nd, so please mark that on your calendars. But again, thank you all for coming, and we'll just close with some, you know, hangout, fellowship. Don't be in a hurry to get out, but appreciate you all for coming. Thank you very much.